Today we're going to be going through how you set up your bike and all your equipment for a big endurance challenge. Now we're going to be going through absolutely everything. Tyre pressures, what displays I have on my Garmin, what I carry in those little saddlebags, what sort of food and nutrition I might take, everything to get you from the start line of your big day to the finish line. First of all, let's get stuck into brakes. We'll come onto those funky gears in a second. Brakes are going to be so important, and if you're about to do especially a very hilly sportive like the Fred Whitton challenge, don't skimp here. Go and get fresh brake pads, brand new for the day. Whether it's disc brakes or rim brakes, you can easily on a wet day here go through an entire set. So ignore where the wear line is, just go and get new fresh pads in and make sure you've got a good solid bike point. You want to make sure that when you're braking that you can still have room for your fingers in there as well. So just really pay attention to your brakes. Now the argument between rim brakes and disc brakes, we can rage that on. I personally really like the security of disc brakes. There's nothing wrong with rim brakes as long as you have them set up correctly. If you are embarking on the Fred Whitton challenge and you have carbon rims and rim brakes, I would really urge you to think twice. There's not a great combination for what you're about to do. And if you do have rim brakes, as well as checking your brake pads, please make sure you are checking the rim thickness as well. Seen too many rim failures on a really steep descent, which can end up in quite a dangerous situation. So onto your wheels then, I really think that a good set of carbon, these are 46mm deep, but for up to 50mm deep and wide rims is really going to help for long endurance rides. The argument about small lightweight climbing wheels versus a deeper dish wheel, I think if you have some bike handling skills where you can handle a tiny little bit of crosswind and you can get used to these, the advantages of having a deeper wheel, they hold the momentum better, they hold their speed better, and the extra width you get from a carbon rim means that you can run a wider tyre at a lower pressure, and that's going to really add to your all-day comfort. I'm running here 28mm thick Pirelli P0s, and I'm running them at about 62 psi, which makes them roll really efficiently, but also they are super comfortable to ride, and you can sit on this absolutely all day long. Okay, let's talk gear ratios. I promise you I will be quick. Now, this is a 1x system. It just happened by chance. My road bike was delayed in shipping, and I've just stuck with this cyclocross bike, to be honest. I just really like the geometry, and it came with a 1x setup, and it's fine, I love it. What I think is really important for endurance sportives like the Fred Whitton challenge is making sure that your lowest gear is at least a 1-to-1 ratio. Having a nice low gear really means that you can spin a reasonable cadence even on the steepest of hills you're going to encounter, and that's just going to really help that muscle fatigue, potentially slow down cramping. It just feels a whole lot nicer if you can spin a reasonable cadence as opposed to fighting your way against and really having to bend the bike to get the pedals to move. So in this situation, I'm running a 42 tooth on my front chainring and matched up with a cassette that runs from 10 all up to 42. So my lowest gear ratio at 42 at 1-to-1. You might want to go lower than that. You can go lower than that. It often takes a few hacks and bodges to get there, but speak to your bike shop, they'll be able to guide you through that. My highest gear, therefore, where I achieve my top speed, I personally find that at a cadence that I spin at 90 RPM, the 42 and 10 is fast enough for most situations, considering that we're normally going downhill pretty rapidly and you don't do much pedaling anyway, and there's quite often tight bends and people, and you don't often achieve those sort of top speeds around the roads here. So I've never really missed it. You know, your mileage may vary. If you are running 2 rings up at the front, your inner ring should probably be a 34 and your biggest sprocket a 34. That would give you a fantastic low ratio climbing gear for something like the Fred Whitton challenge. Again, speak to your local bike shop. They'll be able to guide you as to how to make those gear combinations work. Promise you, low ratio gears are going to change your world. Now, it should go without saying, but please make sure your bike is in a really good, serviceable, roadworthy condition. Check your wheel bearings, check your headset bearings, and check your bottom bracket bearings. They should all be freely rotated. There shouldn't be any wobble in there at all. Any signs of wobble at all, go to a bike shop, get them sorted. You really don't want anything like that destroying your confidence and potentially putting you in dangerous situations on steep descents. Also, why would you want the extra friction when you're on an epic endurance ride? It's definitely worth paying a bit of money to make sure everything is running smoothly, free from any sideways movement and working perfectly. Right, one more piece of very important detail before we get onto all the accessories and the clothing, and that is our bar tape. Now, often overlooked, but if your bar tape is a little bit dirty, a bit greasy, maybe even peeling off in places, go and get it changed. It's definitely worthwhile, because when you've got wet hands, greasy hands from sun cream or feeding, or even like just sweat, you're going to really appreciate being able to wrap your hands around that and get a good grip when you're hitting those descents. It will make the world of difference. Just do it. Okay, onto all the accessories then. Now, I think on a big endurance ride, the pockets on your jersey are much more useful for carrying food and essential items. So I normally put my repair kit in here. I put my very easy to reach food into a little feed bag on the front here. I'll open that up in a second. Have my Garmin mount, obviously, a very, very small light, mostly if it's going to be bad weather rather than getting stuck out in the dark. And then 2 water bottle cages. Now, I really like to use metal cages because if you are bouncing down a really, really rough road and you think your bottle's going to fall out, you can always just bend in the edges of these to give a slightly tighter grip before you put your bottle back in as well. Just being able to do that makes the world of difference. I also find that sometimes the plastic ones can snap. Carbon ones especially, I think, can get worn out and your bottle can come out. So I personally like the metal ones. There's some fantastic lightweight ones out there. So in my little feed bag here, I tend to keep all the things that I can get really, really quick access to. Now, it's really important that you have a good fastening list that you can operate with cold and wet hands, and open this up. And in here is going to be all your loose food. So things like dried apricots, some nuts, jelly babies, I think are fantastic. It's going to get pretty messy and slimy in here because you're going to go in there with wet hands and stuff like that. So try and keep this as clean and as hygienic as you can, but they can get pretty grim. Other things I like are things like the shot blocks. And if you are going to use these, make sure you pre-open them so you just squeeze one out at a time. That's a really good little top tip. I don't tend to put anything in here with excessive wrapping because I want this to be at any time when the road's going up and down. I might be at a pack, probably don't want to take both hands off the handlebars, maybe the road's really bumpy, whatever it is. This has just got to be a very simple, no matter what the terrain is or all the riders around me, that I can always get in here and get something inside my mouth as quickly as possible. So yeah, try and avoid anything with lots and lots of wrappers in there. It should just be open, grab, eat. Now, in my water bottles, I like the darkest colour water bottle to have a really rich saturation of a carbohydrate drink. Something like the SIS Beta Fuel is really good for that. And I'll sip away at that through the first few hours of the ride. The other water bottle, I like to just have plain water or possibly just a very lightly flavoured electrolyte tablet. Really important is to have big, wide mouths so that when you're in the feed station, you can very quickly open the lid, give it to the marshals and get a very, very fast refill and be back out on the ride. Try not to waste any time in feed stations. On this table, I've laid out everything I'll be taking with me on a big ride, apart from my shoes and my shorts, obviously. Now, I want to start with the helmet, and it's definitely worth giving your helmet a check before you set off. One, it should be in really good condition. Make sure there's no cracks or anything like that. And also make sure that it's in date. There is a use by date on your helmets as well. Should be written on the inside of the helmet. And if not, it's 5 years from the date of purchase. It's definitely worth checking. The marshals at events often do spot checks and will turn you away if your helmet is not safe. Also, why wouldn't you want to have a self helmet? That's just worth checking, especially if you've done all this preparation, all this training, and you get turned away at the start line because your helmet's not fit for purpose. A pair of sunglasses. Don't go too dark on these because you never know what the weather conditions are like. I just like a simple set of polarized glasses. These are from Smith. I like these. They work with the helmet really well. We don't want them too dark because this either could be for eye protection in really, really poor conditions, or it could be for sunny conditions. So trying to find something in between that doesn't require lots of swapping around. Definitely want to wear a cycling jersey because all of this really needs to go into my back pockets, and having those 3 good back pockets is really essential. Now, women's jerseys tend to have really, really small back pockets, so just pay attention to that and look for a jersey where you've got 3 decent sized back pockets. You can get enough food and nutrition into them. The jersey that you want might look fantastic, but the pockets might be next to useless, so just pay attention to that. Now, underneath my jersey, I like to wear a mesh vest. These look a bit weird, but they are such a fantastic piece of kit. One, in really, really cold conditions, they will actually provide a reasonable amount of warmth, and in really hot conditions, they actually really, really breathable. So on an event where you start really early in the morning and can be quite cold, but then it gets progressively warmer through the day, these are really vital. Also, if it does get really, really hot, you can actually take these off, and they're small enough that you can stuck that in your back pocket. In terms of overlayers, what I'll probably take is a small windproof jacket. Now this one packs down really small. Again, it will go into a jersey pocket. And if I really, really had to, I don't buy into anything that's too expensive here, because if I really wanted to ditch it, leave it with a Marshall, or just put it in the bin because everything was getting a bit too heavy in my pockets, then I don't mind losing this, or if it gets ripped or whatever. So this is an old wind shell that just gets screwed up, thrown around. It's a good wind resistance layer, and it will keep off a fair amount of rain as well, especially if you're still riding hard. You don't want anything that's too warm. Of course, if the weather conditions are really, really atrocious, then a full waterproof, absolutely. But for setting off in the cold of the morning, or looking at the weather forecast and seeing that there's some poorer weather coming through mid-ride, and you just need something that might need to get you to the finish line, I think these really work well. And again, don't invest too much into it. Keep it small, keep it light, keep it disposable in the back of your mind if you really, really had to lose it. Now, if it's really good weather, like a normal pair of nice lightweight socks, but if it's going to be cold or wet, then a set of waterproof socks is going to be your best friend. Now, don't need to go too heavy and insulated on this, but waterproof, more so for the wind insulation, is really going to help. Remember, your feet don't really get much movement on a bike, and they can get cold really quickly, and that horrible numb feeling of your feet can be offset by the good pair of waterproof socks. These are made by a company called Dexshell. Sealskin's another good brand. Again, worth investing in, especially if it's going to be a cold and wet day. So gloves, I personally like the ones without too much padding, but your mileage may vary. I find that the pads tend to actually create more pressure points than they take away. So this is really about keeping hands warm and maintaining a really good grip. So these have got a really good grippy palm. These are made by a company called Grip Grab. I really recommend them, definitely worth checking out. And full fingers, really. I don't think, if you're going to carry gloves on something like on a big endurance ride, it's worth having the full fingers. I don't really notice it in hotter weather, or if it's really, really warm, I just take my gloves off completely and just go bare hands. But keeping them lightweight is really important, and not having all the padding really helps them roll up in a little ball. Again, they'll go into your back pocket if you really, really want to ditch them in hot weather. So a set of really good quality arm warmers. Don't go too heavy and too fleecy with them. This is just really about keeping that wind chill off your arms, especially in the early mornings, and knowing that if the weather does come through, that you've got something there. If you're pushing on the pace a bit, you can normally ride a bit wet and damp. It's not very pleasant, but you'll normally be able to maintain good enough body temperature so long as you can cover up exposed skin. So this is going to really help without having to put an extra shell on, which might not be that breathable and can be quite uncomfortable, not aero, and also just annoying to wear. So yeah, good set of arm warmers. Wouldn't normally do knee or leg warmers on something that's around the May time. It could change. Sometimes we've had snow and all sorts of mad conditions. But generally speaking, setting off in shorts is about right, unless the weather forecast is absolutely atrocious. And finally on this thing is a polar heart rate strap. Again, I personally like to do this. We'll talk about this when we come to the Garmin, but I think it's definitely worth wearing. It really helps with your pacing, but we'll come to that later in the video. Okay. So the big subject here really is nutrition. And there is an awful lot of food here, but this is about right for an 8-hour-ish ride. Laid out here is all the food that I would take on a ride I was expecting to last somewhere between 7.5 to 9.5 hours. I give that time frame because on a really good day, everything going fantastic, you would probably be pushing on quite hard and consuming more calories. If you had mechanicals and problems and were struggling, you'd probably still get through the same calories, albeit at maybe a lower heart rate. That's an average, I guess, finishing time for something like the Fred Whitton challenge. Now I wouldn't take the whole box of jelly babies, but definitely a good handful of those goes in something like that, along with some dried fruit and nuts, which I don't have here today. Now, I tend to think about things as what I'm going to eat per hour, and we need to have some sort of an idea of your kilojoule consumption in the hour, and that's where a power meter can be really, really useful. But generally speaking, I work on about 400 to 500 kilojoules per hour. So that means that 2 of these bars per hour, for instance, but something like a Cliff Bar will get me through an entire hour. But they are quite dense and quite hard to digest, especially if you have the whole thing in one go. So I might like to think about having half a bar every half an hour rather than 1 bar every hour, and tend to graze, and then back that up with the stuff that I have in my feed bag. So we might have a packet of Cliff shot blocks here, and maybe try and get through 3 of these every hour or so. Maybe they back that up with a few jelly babies and a few nuts as well, so you're constantly eating through this. Other things I have in here is normally just a couple of gels. I don't really get on massively well with gels. I think they can become overly sweet and you get quite an acidic stomach. However, if you have been pushing on a little bit and you are feeling tired and there's a big hill coming up, downing one of these with a big slurp of water will definitely give you a little energy boost that you're really looking for. I really like Energy Chews as well from Scratch Labs. These go in the same category of the Cliff shot blocks. And for really high density fuel, you can't really beat the SIS beta fuel. This is like 80 grams of carbohydrate, and that's going to go inside your water bottle, and you can just constantly slip that. It's quite sugary, and you probably want to have just a normal water bottle as well, just to get rid of the acidity in your mouth. So on here, you see I've got a good range of sugary stuff, but also the Scratch Labs are quite natural ingredients. They're sort of more like cereals and nuts and oats and stuff. You don't tend to get quite the energy kick out of them, but it is really important to mix up your fuel. Same with the OTEs. These are nice organic and vegan type of foods and easy to digest, where some of these more dense fuels can sit a bit heavy on the stomach sometimes. Having a good range is really important. Also, a couple of little treats from the Velo Forte bars. These are just absolutely delicious, quite expensive, quite heavy. I wouldn't have all of those in my back pocket because your back pocket will just be weighed down by the weight, but as a halfway point or just before the really hardest climb sort of idea, it's definitely worth having a couple of those in your back pocket. Right, let's clear all this down and get that toolbox out, and then we'll start going through some of the gadgets as well. Let's take this saddle bag off and show you what we've got inside here. Now, if you're going to use one of these, then just get one that is literally the right size. Don't be tempted to go too big. You want to try and keep everything nice and light and compact, and you definitely don't want it to rattle. Any sort of rattle is going to wind you up for your entire ride. I like these ones from Toe Peak. They're slimline, they work really nicely, and they keep everything nice and sort of squished in to avoid that rattle. Let's open it up and see what we've got. First off, a multi-tool. Now, make sure you're able to use this, because some of them get so small and so light that actually become a little bit unusable. But on this multi-tool, we have got a 6 and an 8mm Allen key. So the 6mm is used for removing my through axles on my disc brake bike, and the 8mm is for the main crank bolt on my power meter. Also got a T25 for disc brake screws. I don't actually have any of those, but on my SRAM calipers, they actually use a T25 rather than a hex key, so it's worth making sure you've got one of those. There's also a small T15 for things like brake bleed nipples. Shouldn't need to touch that. There's a small Phillips number 2, which is good for adjusting derailleurs. Hopefully that you shouldn't need to adjust that on a ride either, unless there's a real problem. There's the normal sizes of Allen keys. It's important to have a really small one. We go right the way down to 2mm on this, up to 4. 4mm is pretty standard for things like headset bolts. And I do actually have a chain tool here as well. Now, before you just go out and buy a multi-tool with a chain tool thinking you've got it all covered, make sure that you can actually use this, because most of the time the chain brakes attached to multi-tools are very hard to use, and trying to do it with gloves on, there's just not enough leverage for most people. Now, I'm quite an experienced mechanic and I'm okay with this, but it does take me quite a lot of effort, and I've got to think about some extra leverage on there. But I wouldn't recommend it for everybody. If you can't do that, don't worry about it. Just buy a very small, lightweight chain tool. It's really important. Just make sure that the multi-tool that you're actually going to buy is actually going to work with the common problems on your bike. Like I say, my calipers are held on with a Torx bolt rather than a hex bolt, so just have a look around your bike and make sure that you've got something covered. Also in here we have a very, very lightweight inner tube from Tubolito, because I run my tyres tubeless with tubeless sealant in there, but if they do fail, I get a sidewall rip, then I'm going to need to put a tube in there. And my first off is a very, very lightweight inner tube. I mean, this weighs next to nothing. However, they are expensive and you wouldn't want to have them for everything, but if you're running tubeless and you're confident with your setup, that is a good way of getting yourself out of stick. On something like the Fred Whitton, it's a bit more belt and braces, and in here I also have a regular inner tube as well. Just a top tip, make sure that the valves are going to be long enough for your wheels. So quite often I see people buy the right size inner tube, but the valves aren't long enough to go through a deep dish carbon rim like that. So the reason I carry two is because if I need to patch one, Tubolitos don't tend to patch very easily. So in this little bag here, I have some little self-adhesive patches and a little bit of sandpaper, so if I do need to just sand down the sides, I can just sand them down and then repair an inner tube. So this, I've got, worst case scenario, 2 tubeless failures where I need 2 tubes and I get a puncture in these tubes, I'm still able to keep riding, and that's pretty important. I've also got 2 quick links in here for the chain, so if the chain does break, I'm able to do a very, very quick repair. So I'm really using that chain tool only to remove the broken links. I'm not trying to make a repair in the field, which can take a long, long time and can go quite badly wrong, especially if you're cold and rushing. So 2 little chain quick links, really important. So also in here I have just 2 20-gram gas inflators, which is enough for doing 4 inflations really, and I've got a regulator where I can control the flow, so I should be able to get 4 inflations out of that. Now, would I carry a pump as well? Possibly, might be tempted to carry a very, very small lightweight pump, but I would have to be onto my 4th or 5th puncture for that to be a necessity. Maybe looking at the road conditions, I might throw it into my back pocket last minute, but I think with that setup, along with tubeless tyres that I know have got fresh sealant in, I think that is enough for a ride like this. So far in this video, we've covered the bike to make sure that the bike is fit for purpose. We've made sure that we are dressed and that we are fed, and we've got a way of maintaining our bike. The last part of this video then, I really want to think about pacing and some of the technology and methodology in how I'm going to go around pacing a ride like this as well. Okay. I'm going to need a jelly baby before we do that. Okay, just a little zoom in on my Garmin here. This is going to be my main ride screen for something like this. And the 2 bits of stats that I'm really interested in is the elapsed time and my average speed. Now, before I've already set off, I've already got an idea of a target finishing time. So I want to know how close I am to that with my elapsed time. And I'm going to make sure I keep this running even though it might be in feed stops. And also my average speed, because to achieve my target time, I will also have an idea about what average speed I need to attain as well. So having those 2 stats up there really helps me keep an eye on how I'm progressing through the ride. Now, this big display in the center of my Garmin is actually a little Garmin app from a company called Xert, and this is going to give me my power, but the color is also going to tell me what training zone I'm in at that particular time. The MPA is maximum power available. If you're an Xert user, you'll know about what that is. If not, don't worry about it too much. Next one down is my kilojoules. This is linked to my power meter. So rather than calories linked to something like a heart rate monitor, this is coming off my power meter, and I'm using the kilojoules to calculate my nutritional demands as well. So it's really good to have that, and I know how many kilojoules per hour I might be consuming. My percentage of FTP, don't really need that because I've already got that in this color bands here, but I quite like to see it. Underneath there is intensity factor. It gives me an idea on how hard the ride is going, whether I'm ahead or below what I think it should be. For an endurance ride, probably looking at around 70 to 80% in that endurance factor. And finally, in the left-hand corner, also an app from Xert is fat and carbs. And again, this is calculated by when I am below or above certain thresholds to give me an idea of what my body needs to maintain the intensity that I'm riding at. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you very much for watching. You put all this time and effort into your training. Please make sure you put just as much time and effort into planning and preparing for your big day. Make sure you have the skills to use the equipment and put some time and thought into planning your pacing as well. Thank you very much for listening. Have a fantastic and successful ride, everybody. I hope that was useful.
Do it then, gonna do it then, gon' do it